this outbreak has seen that young people 20, 25 years, 30 years without any health issues, without any obesity, they are going into the ICU and actually their mortality also. So what we do is that once we diagnose the patient as COVID or suspected COVID for that matter, from fourth day onwards, we start doing what we call as inflammatory markers. And I'm sure everybody knows about it, C-reactive protein, D-dimer, and all those, ferritin and interleukin 6, and of course, CBC. These markers we do every third day to find out whether this person is going into severe disease. So, doing CT is expensive, it involves radiation, and I would strongly uh, say against CT, especially in women of childbearing age, because it has a lot of implication in long term. But with these inflammatory markers, we are able to pick up that this person is going into hyperimmune syndrome, that means the severe disease. And then we ask for a CT to see the pneumonia. By the time, what the guidelines say, by the time the oxygen drops, a lot of damage has taken place. So we must pick up patients if you want to save the patient, if you want to reduce the mortality. You have to pick up patients before the oxygen level goes down. One lung is sufficient to maintain the oxygenation. So more than one lung should be damaged for the system to pick it up. So therefore, you don't want to reach that stage. You pick it up that his CRP is rising, his D-dimer is rising, he is having fever, he is having cough. Please do a CT. Start him on steroids, start him on remdesivir, think of doing plasma. So if he evades the diagnosis and waits for the severe disease, his care will be affected and he is at risk of getting death also. So it is important for anybody in today's time to be vigilant about the diagnosis and so that the management can be planned. Cycle threshold is a measure of replication of virus, which in a way exemplifies the viral load. Lower the cycle threshold value, higher is the replication. Shorter is the replication cycle, higher is the viral load. It denotes higher transmission potential. So if I talk about it, suppose somebody gets a CT value of say 16, and you do it after 4 days, it goes to 20, then it goes to 30. And if it goes above 35, it is non-contagious. More than 35 is not even reported. So again, I am saying it denotes the transmission potential. However, it has not shown to be related to the severity of disease. So, have I made myself clear?
Yes, sir.
So, my suggestion would be don't even look at it, because I, in my practice, I have not found it to be useful. People do call me, my CT value is this gene is this much, this gene is this much. It has no relationship with the severity of disease, nor it has relation to the duration of antiviral therapy, nor it is relation of duration of antibiotics or oxygen therapy or anything. If you permit me, something I missed that I would like to say for a minute or two in the post-COVID part, which I did not cover. There is a tremendous role of rehabilitation in post-COVID time. And this is of two kinds. One is for lung, one is for general health. I have seen people after COVID, they just lie listlessly. There is a fatigue, of course. And they think अभी COVID है, COVID time में walk करने नहीं जा सकते, बाहर नहीं जा सकते, तो पड़े रहते. That's not a good way. If you want to recover faster, you should increase your exercise capacity gently, gradually to the limit of your tolerance. There is an evidence that it will hasten your recovery. That is one. If there is a lung involvement, there is a definite role of breathing exercises, and there are various small gadgets which cost very little to do breathing exercise, or you want to do pranayama or whatever. So post-COVID management is not by vitamin C or zinc, which is being given, which is being sold like, everybody is taking it as if this is a magic drug. There's no scientific evidence that it does cause any benefit to us, although I also do right. But the more benefit will come for leading a healthy lifestyle, minimize alcohol intake, and good food, plenty of fluids, exercise will go a long way in faster recovery. And another what people frequently ask is, should we stop alcohol? Do we need to stop alcohol if we want to take vaccination? Answer is, if you are taking alcohol in moderation, you need not stop. If you are abusing the alcohol, then of course the efficacy of vaccine will go down. Scan gives us the extent of pneumonia, and I'm sure all of you know. Okay, my score is 6 by 25, mine is 3 by 25. There's a serious patient whose score is 18 by 25. This gives the extent of lung involvement, and which cannot be discerned on X-ray. So that way CT scan is an excellent tool, but that's not answer to your question. Somebody who has got COVID infection, suppose he's 25 years old, has got mild fever, and his inflammatory markers are okay, he has a little bit of cough, his oxygen is alright, he need not get a CT scan. However, if somebody is on the 5th or 6th day, starts coughing a lot and he's short of breath, on walking 6 minutes, his saturation is going down, and you want to assess whether his lung is being affected, he is a candidate for CT scan. Third, the person who has a high propensity of severe disease, like elderly or smokers or those with heart disease or diabetes or those on immunosuppression, those who are rheumatoid disease and so on and so forth, they should have a low threshold for getting a CT done because they may not have symptoms of pneumonia. Other thing is that sometimes person has fever for 6 days, 7 days in today's era, and the RT-PCR is negative, but physicians feel that this could be COVID. Then when you do the CT, then you realize, oh, this can be nothing but COVID. And this is not an unusual situation in our hospital, but it should not be done every alternate day as some people are doing. So I'll summarize it, I'll not confuse you. The CT is a good tool for assessing the severity of pneumonia. CT is a good tool for patients who are difficult to diagnose. And CT is a good tool after the COVID. If somebody is having breathlessness, to find out whether this patient has actually gone into the lung scarring or what is called pulmonary fibrosis. So a person who has a low risk of having severe disease as mild disease must not do a CT. A person who has got a high risk should do a CT. We do it for all the time. Person who is having a worsening of course, we repeat the CT in the hospital to assess the severity so as to we can plan the treatment for them. COVID is a prothrombotic state. Prothrombotic means that there is a tendency to form clots. When the autopsy studies were done initially from Italy had the highest death rate of 50 to 20% in elderly. So they did autopsy, they found that their arteries, vessels were clogged on histopathology. So they realized that it is where clots are formed. So D-dimer is a test which we normally use for clotting disorder. Suppose pulmonary, there's a clotting in the lung or clotting somewhere, the D-dimer would be raised. If there's a clot in the veins, the D-dimer would be raised. D-dimer is also raised when there is a inflammation or sepsis or infection. Two things. So the COVID inflammation is an inflammation which also has a clot formation tendency. So therefore, if the person has COVID infection or COVID pneumonia and his D-dimer is rising or D-dimer is high, then this is the person who is a candidate for being watched carefully. He is likely to have severe disease. Then we also give him anticoagulation. And anticoagulation is giving, you must have heard of heparin, low molecular weight heparin or whatever we give. There are some oral tablets also which are given. So D-dimer will tell us the severity of disease. D-dimer will tell us that anti-inflammatory is required. Now there's a rider. I get calls of panic. Suppose the normal value is 0.5 and somebody has a COVID with the value of 0.6 or 0.7. That doesn't call for panic. The interpretation of D-dimer will have to be done by a physician. The most important parameter which to my mind tells me the severity is CRP, that is C-reactive protein. It is a non-specific marker of inflammation. So as I said in my presentation, that in my answering, that in the patient who has got COVID, we test these markers periodically, maybe every third day, and pick it up early that things are worsening. So answering your question, Ms. Sandhya, that D-dimer is a marker of thrombosis, that is a tendency to clot formation. It is also a marker of inflammation, and inflammation is the one which causes damage. So here I would like to emphasize what I did not cover, that COVID is not only affects lungs, it affects heart also. There are heart attacks, there are sudden deaths also. That is why when the patient with COVID recovers and somebody is a fitness freak, they want to immediately go for jogging and to prove themselves that they have recovered completely. But there are reports of people dropping dead while jogging after COVID. So because there is a tendency to thrombosis, and that is exemplified by D-dimer test. So that is why it is important, but interpretation is little difficult as the medicine is. Thank you. I showed a study, but I browsed too fast because I promised that I won't load you with that study. That's a very properly conducted study given to the mild people in a randomized trial and showed that it does not lead to prevention of severity. Severity did not change. Ivermectin is an antiparasitic, कीड़ों की दवा होती है, and it has an immunomodulatory effect, and very sketchy evidence of benefit is there. And we all know about hydroxychloroquine, the big politics about it, Indian Prime Minister, US Prime Minister donating hydroxychloroquine, and the subsequent studies, nobody is using hydroxychloroquine, although it is still in the guideline for prevention of azithromycin is a broad spectrum antibiotic which has an immunomodulatory effect, and so is doxycycline also. Now what I'm saying is little bold and harsh and hard-hitting statement. They do nothing to the progress of or the treatment of COVID. So it is a customary to give as a broad spectrum antibiotic doxycycline or azithromycin in case some benefit is there. After all, the disease is lethal. Disease can cause death. So that's how the hydroxychloroquine as an immunomodulator was used. So we are using ivermectin. So what we do is that we give it for a period of 5 days and then stop. We don't repeat that course. And patients come to me, Doctor साहब मैंने 5 दिन के लिए ये भी ले लिया, ये भी ले लिया, ये भी ले लिया, ये भी ले लिया, but still I am having symptoms. The fact of the matter is, the only antiviral drug which has shown some benefit in symptoms is remdesivir. The rest of these drugs, so my take is that one should take the prescription, whatever is given by the physician, but don't expect that this is the treatment of bacterial infection. You have bacterial infection, you give antibiotic. You have a TB infection, give anti-TB. So these are not antiviral drugs because you are dealing with the viral pathology. These are immunomodulators which are stipulated to improve about which so far there is no benefit, proven benefit. So 5 days take it, stop it and follow the patient.
And so if the symptoms are persisting, a couple of people are asking this question, shall steroids be added then?
So
and what is the role? Yeah.
One, that steroids, of course, you can't, you should not add steroids. There are different indications for giving steroids, and one of the indication is, of course, if the oxygen is low, and I think it's too late for uh, to start steroids because it saves the person. If there is pneumonia, as seen on CT or X-ray or whatever, which is associated with increase in the inflammatory markers, of which C-reactive protein is most important, and I take 20 as a cutoff point. If both are there, or that sometime rarely, the symptoms are intolerable. The fever is touching 105, it is not responding to anything. But my thinking based on the science is that it should never be given in first 5 days unless there is defined indication, because corticosteroid will enhance the viral replication. Your viral load would increase. It can control, it's a double-edged sword. So therefore, if the 5 days have passed by, there is a pneumonia, there's a CRP is high, or the oxygen is low, if either is there, then you give steroid, and it should never be taken over the counter. It has to be prescribed by a physician and followed by the physician. That you are COVID negative, because after the second jab, especially, the muscle pains, fever, fatigue, and documented fever and excessive tiredness is extremely common. Nobody is bothered about the local pain which occurs in 5% of. When I got my jab, I actually had to press कि कहीं क्या हुआ, कुछ हुआ क्या, मुझे बताना है लोगों को, शाम को पूछेंगे लोग कि आपको क्या हुआ. लेकिन after the second jab, especially Covishield, because I got Covishield, we actually felt fatigue, and the symptoms are almost similar like you have in COVID. And fever, feeling cold, but the cough won't be there. This won't be a symptom. So along with the fever, cough, then you might be having COVID. If there is only muscle pain and fatigue and the weakness and the documented fever, consider it to be adverse effect of or side effects of vaccination. However, if it continues beyond 48 hours, then get worried. In fact, the US recommendation, of course, the vaccine was different. They had recommended that please organize 2 days leave after second jab. Take leave in advance. So this is not unexpected. So in my experience, I have seen people who have had fatigue for a longer time if they are elderly. But generally, in 2 days' time, everybody recovers. But in today's time, your question was very good, because some people have developed COVID just after the vaccination. And it's very human mind to attribute it to the vaccination, but vaccination doesn't cause COVID infection, because none of the vaccine contains the virus which can cause disease. Where people, after 4 weeks of COVID infection, they asked them, how are you doing? And on a questionnaire basis, only 16% people said that we are all right. We have no symptoms. 84% people had symptoms, and commonest symptom, and that of course we are sufficiently experienced now with so many cases. The commonest symptom is fatigue. That lack of energy. You go to office, you don't feel like working, you come back, normally you are energetic, you just want to lie down and that's a common symptom. Other is body aches, muscle ache. Other is one symptom is that you feel feverish, but actually the fever is not there. You feel, and you put thermometer at below 99 and you call your doctor, he says, no, don't worry, you don't have. But you are feeling feverish. One of the most important symptoms is sleep disturbance. And sleep disturbance in the form of inability to go to sleep. There are panic attacks. A person gets in the middle of the night and is unable to go to sleep. and he perspires in the night, and this all is happening. Psychiatric disturbances are extremely common. Depression is common. Agitation is also common. Cognitive dysfunction. One of the politicians, of course, I will not name him. Post-COVID, he said, "I forgot that three people were waiting to meet me, and I just walked out of my house." And he said, "Can it be because of COVID?" And the literature says that it can occur. Besides that, persisting cough, especially those who have tendency, like as we talked about asthma, or those who have severe pneumonia, they would have persistent cough, persistent soreness of throat, irritation, running nose. This can persist for a period of longer time. Some neurological problems can also be there. Muscle weakness can be there, partly because of COVID, partly because of the corticosteroid that we give, which causes muscle weakness. Precipitation of diabetes is extremely common because the doctors load patients with steroids all the time in order to, you know, uh, cause complete recovery. If we talk about the organ dysfunction, even the heart functioning may get affected, kidney may get affected, liver is very occasionally, very rarely affected. So, common symptoms I have already narrated, rare things I am not talking about. Some clotting disorders are also, like strokes, neurological strokes, are also described, but common symptoms are these, and unfortunately, they continue for quite some time. This is SARS-2. This is new SARS. SARS-1, which occurred almost 15 years back, and this is a published literature when they found people 3 years later, those who have had SARS-1 infection, that is also corona infection. 40% said we are still fatigued. So I am not scaring you. This is data. Important is that don't rush for remedies. In my experience, it goes away gradually, but it takes time. Thank you. The CDC, Center of Disease Control, Atlanta, which is the most respected body, it just says that if your 10 days have passed by in the mild cases, and for last 3 days you have no fever, then you are free of corona and you are free of contagiousness. That is the CDC's recommendation. The ICMR Indian guideline says that after the beginning of the symptom, 17 days from the onset, you need not be tested. You just be free, and it's not recommended to test it again and again and again. So that is about the mild illness. But those who require ICU care, they continue to be positive for some time, even 2 months or 1 month. So the standard is 17 days. If you follow that, answer one by one. Vitamin D deficiency have been associated with reduced immunity, and it has been associated with increased rate of infection, increased severity of infection, not with COVID in general. And vitamin D is the one which we all are deficient because we are hardly exposed to sun and whatever the dietary things. So if somebody who is deficient in vitamin D should take supplementation. It should not be blanket. That every prescription should not have vitamin D3 once a week, and then calcium also you have to give along with that. That's not necessary. But especially the ladies who are post-menopausal or menopausal, they generally have deficiency of vitamin D and calcium. They can take along with that. That's one. Zinc is time honored, and there are studies from India also and from abroad that zinc is deficiency is associated with viral infection in children, especially rotavirus infection. So there's a scientific basis that if there's a zinc deficiency, it will lead to more viral infections. And that is the genesis of giving zinc supplementation to this. So there's no harm. At the end of the day, there's no harm. And vitamin C is also, associated with zukam ke liye, viral infections ke liye. But scientific evidence is very sketchy. Since there are harmless substances, especially zinc and multivitamins and vitamin C being water soluble, so one can take it, but one should not think that since you are taking it, you will be immune to these infections or your recovery would be faster. I do not subscribe to that. This question would come up because a large proportion of people are already infected, so the fear is always there. So I don't have the percentages, but in my personal experience, neither there is a literature saying that how many percentage can get infection, and this literature won't come. But I know from my personal knowledge that second infection do occur. There could be two reasons for that. One is that we know that after 3 months, the COVID immunity starts waning. And second is mutants, which I have already talked about. So therefore, there is already talk about in US, the Pfizer vaccine, which is actually changed the game in US. They are talking about second booster, that means third injection to attain the immunity. So therefore, second infection is extremely uncommon, but it does occur. Usually it is a milder infection. Usually it's not a severe infection. Vaccine is a killed vaccine. So virus is killed. It cannot give you infection. And there are so many vaccines which you and me and everybody has got from birth, which are made in India and they are killed vaccines. It's the immunogenicity. That means when you give a vaccine to these people, 97% of the people developed antibodies, and this is the phase 1 and phase 2 studies. Efficacy of Covaxin is 81%. Efficacy, I explained to you how it is calculated depending upon how many people developed COVID when the repeated PCRs were done, even in asymptomatic people. Covishield vaccine has an efficacy, a blanket efficacy of 61%. But however, when it is given when you increase the gap, the efficacy rises to somewhere near 80%. In a smaller study, when it was given in half dose in the first jab and the full dose in the second jab, it rose to 90%. So that we say 62 to 90%. As far as the safety is concerned, both are equally safe. I mean, need not bore you with how many percentage get fever and all. So far, I am quite confused with this question. Which one is better? I got Covishield vaccine. So my take would be that whichever you get first, whichever is available. So far, there is no scientific data to say which one is better than the other because the long-term studies are not there. So the question is, if your time has come for second jab, should you go to a vaccination center and get vaccine or delay it? So it be anecdotal for me to say that if the 6 weeks have gone past, wait for 2 weeks. We are expecting that in 2 weeks' time that the incidence of this outbreak has a natural course, and because of down in Delhi or in some other place, it will come down. But if you must go for vaccination and the 8 weeks are elapsing, your time is, so you should take all the precautions. And these precautions would be that you wear gloves. They may not be sterile. You wear double mask, and you wear a double mask. And when you have a N95 mask and one surgical or cloth mask, the cloth mask should be inside, and then the N95 mask. Wear a shield and go to the vaccination center. Quickly get vaccinated. Normally, you are required to sit there for half an hour under observation. So gently request them that I'll sit in my car. I'll not sit here. There's nothing wrong in that. You are still in the healthcare facility. You are at the center. You go to the car, sit there for half an hour. You may inform them that you have waited for the stipulated time. Go home, shed your clothes for washing, go for a warm water shower with soap and all. You are good. There is always some laxity in your COVID appropriate behavior. And I have got a conviction for that, where you get this infection. So if you take all these precautions, you would be good, and you should not delay your vaccination, because at the cost of repetition, I would say that your immunity will come only when you get a second jab, the proper immunity. So therefore, don't delay it beyond the stipulated time. Maybe a couple of weeks delay will not make any difference. And then, as I said, and this precaution I told to a friend, so I am reciting them. If you follow this, you would be safe. Thank you. The antiplatelet is concerned, ecosprin or clopidogrel or other agents, there is absolutely no contraindication. They need not stop. Those who have, suppose somebody has mitral valve replacement, and they usually monitor their coagulation status by doing INR, international normalized ratio. So before vaccination, they should do that test and see that this is within the range. The normal range is it is kept between 2 and 3. Now there is a group of people who have congenital disease like hemophilia, if you have heard somewhere, from the birth, congenitally their clotting mechanism is genetically defective. These are the people who have to be more careful and have to inform the vaccination center. The adverse effects is only one, that there will be local collection of blood. So therefore, summarizing it, antiplatelets, no question, no test is required. If somebody is taking anticoagulation, he should test his INR before getting the vaccination. At best, after the jab, he can put some ice into it so that he doesn't bleed. Person with hemophilia like diseases, they have to be extra cautious and take their medicines or injections for hemophilia before taking the injection. So there is no absolute contraindication. 40% of the world population has allergic rhinitis. 5 to 10% of the world population has asthma. That is not a contraindication at all. And those people who have had anaphylaxis, what is anaphylaxis? This is a severe allergic reaction, like classically it occurs with penicillin. You get a penicillin jab, within seconds or a minute, the person perspires, his blood pressure goes down. It's a life-threatening event which requires immediate resuscitation. That is the reason it is said that after vaccination, 30 minutes you spend on the center. So, allergic condition, asthma, no contraindication, no precautions to be taken. One should go for the vaccination. Those with pre-existing lung disease like interstitial lung disease or chronic bronchitis or COPD, they come in the priority group. That means they stand to benefit more than anybody else from the vaccination, because should they get pneumonia, they'll be affected much more than the person who has a healthy lung. So they should also go for vaccination. 17 days from the first symptom, you need not be tested. The severe cases, those in the ICU require ICU care, the RT-PCR remains positive even for a couple of months or 6 weeks. So the standard of care is 17 days. The CDC says 10 days. However, if the symptoms are continuing in terms of documented fever and all, then you need to be tested to be shown negative. If the symptoms are abated and you are feeling good, 17 days, no need for test.
So,
as far as vaccination is concerned, it is not recommended to test yourself. However, if you are running any kind of fever or any kind of unwellness, that's the time you should not vaccinate yourself. Or if you are getting large doses of steroids for any disease, you should wait for it reduce, or if you are getting some immunomodulator, if they can be stocked for 2 weeks, it is better. But it's not recommended to test for COVID by RT-PCR before getting vaccinated. By God forbid, if concomitantly, if you are vaccinated at the time you are actually having asymptomatic infection, no harm would be done as far as your health is concerned.